All right, good morning, back again, and we're ready to look at James in our international lesson. Now, we're looking at James. We've been in Corinthians, we've been in Timothy, we've been in other books in the New Testament, and now we're in James. If we were following chronologically, James would have been before all those others. Because James is the leader of the church, and very early on, he was executed. Herod killed him and beheaded him and did it to please the Jews, as it says in the book of Acts. But James was a half-brother of Jesus. Now, in different communions of the Christian faith, some say he wasn't a half-brother, he was a cousin. And there is some possibilities of that as you read the names of the people that were in the following of Jesus. Particularly, his mother is mentioned, and then there's Mary and Salome, and also the wife of, can't even think of his name, Cleopas was there. So one of those, they would say, that was his cousin, his mother's sister. And so that was where it was, and cousins could be like brothers. Well, whatever. We find them in the Bible, and James and his brothers and sister don't like Jesus. They're older than he is. They don't like him. In John, you find it where the festival is in Jerusalem, and the brothers and the family are going down to Jerusalem to the festival. And Jesus says, I'm not going down. And his family says to him, why don't you go down and do some marvelous works down there? Now, it sounds like they really go along with him and think that he's doing something. No, his brothers are saying this as a mock. Why don't you get down there and be so important with everybody else, you know? They're jealous. There's a real jealousy here in Jesus. And not only about his brother, when he goes to Nazareth and he preaches his first sermon there, they want to kill him. And he passes through the crowd. So there's a problem with it. And that's what's going to come up here as we cover this. It's the resurrection that changes everything for James and his family. Even Mary. Mary has problems understanding Jesus, and that's understandable. I mean, even though the angels told her that she was going to give birth to him, and it would be the Holy Spirit and all that, that hasn't happened every week. It was a one-time thing, and you begin to wonder, did I really understand? John the Baptist was his cousin and leaped in the womb of his mother when Mary came to visit Elizabeth. But when John's in prison and near death, he sends some of his disciples to Jesus and says, are you really the Messiah? Because John had said, that's the Lamb of God, that's the anointed one, that's the Messiah. And now he's in prison and he's facing death, and he sends disciples and says, are you really the one? Or should we look for another? John, you haven't got much time to look for another. You're going to be dying. See, but we have to put it in the perspective of the times. Those were people who struggled with faith, and they had faith, but they had to wrestle with it. And Paul says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Yeah, there's some work to it. And such. We've got the Bible, and it makes it easy for us to kind of go back on that. Well, James writes a general letter, and this is how he begins it at the first part of his letter. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. Doesn't say I'm a brother. He just says I'm a servant. To the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. Now, there's the introduction. Who are the 12 tribes? That's the Jewish nation. Now, we haven't heard of the 10 tribes of the north, that is, of Israel, in 500 years. Nobody knows anything about them. We know the word Jew comes from the word Judah. So the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, which constituted Judah, the southern kingdom, were the people that came back from Babylon and began, again, built another temple. Were the people that encountered the Romans and out of which Jesus came, because he was of the tribe of Judah, family of David. So he's writing to Jewish Christians. And he says to them, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If anyone lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Now that's a good introduction. He's writing to them and saying you lack nothing. God is willing to give you everything. It's a letter that maybe there's more than one copy, because it's going out to all if you think of Pentecost, all the Jews at Pentecost, from Cappadocia, from Galatia, from Greece, they're gathering from Egypt, Alexandria. Alexandria was a great Jewish community down in Egypt. The library and stuff. Our Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, came from Alexandria. That's where it was translated. There's Jews all over the place, and probably even to the east, towards Arabia, Syria, maybe even in India, there were Jewish communities. So he's writing to all these dispersed peoples. So maybe many letters. He may have made copies. He may have had some of the scribes at Jerusalem, where he was head of the church, make copies, and then send them out with apostles. Now, the problem of it is he's not sending out a great doctrinal treatise. Great document. A great doctrinal document. Treatise, that's the word I'm trying to come up with. Treatise. He's sending out a problem. He's going to talk about a problem. A simple problem. And you would say, is it that bad? It can be that bad. It can be that bad. Because here's the problem. He says, I want to write you about a problem that you have, and I'm going to talk about it. Now, that I just was in chapter 1, now I'm in chapter 2. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord, Jesus Christ, you must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing the fine clothes, and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you sit over there, sit at the floor by my feet. Have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Now he goes on to talk about that more there. But we're talking about just simple favoritism. We're not talking about a doctrine of who Jesus Christ is. We're not talking about a theology of heaven. We're not talking about even the doctrine of grace. Now, grace comes into this. We're talking about simple favoritism. All of us have experienced that at some point in time. When somebody treated somebody else in a way different than they treated us. I remember getting picked up when we played games in school, in gym class. And two people would be chosen to be the pickers. And they would pick. Can you imagine what it felt like to be the last one picked? Like the other team had to take you because you couldn't do anything, And that was a horrible feeling. Now, that didn't often happen to me, but it could happen. But I can tell you, I felt sorry for those kids that were chosen last in terms of this. And the coach, I remember, now this is going to sound like I'm prejudiced, isn't it? But the coach would say, all right, every other pick has to be a girl. You can't just pick all the guys and then shuffle the girls out, to play softball or kickball or whatever. It had to be, but it was much better to come up with other ways of choosing up a team, and that's what I do at camp. I don't do you pick in that. I do it by age. I do it by color of your eyes. There's different ways that don't pick on you because of who you are, kind of thing, or whether you're gifted or not. All right, now he's saying favoritism. Now I could see, okay, in the Jerusalem church, we might have a problem there, but up in Galatia, we wouldn't have a problem with that. Over in Cappadocia, we might have a problem, but up in Philippi, we wouldn't have that problem. Well, James is writing to all the Jewish Christians, the 12 tribes, wherever they may be, and saying, we got a problem. We got a problem. And it's favoritism. Now, I one time took a day off, a Sunday off, because I had to go upstate back to where I was up in Tioga County to do a program up there. And so I left after the early service down at Lufers Grove, and I took off. Now, I didn't dress up for Luther's Grove. I dress up for Luther's Grove. If I was doing the other church services, I didn't wear a suit, but I'd wear a tie and sweater and stuff like that. But I had my grubby clothes on, farm clothes, because I was going up to do some farm stuff and then to do a program. I stopped at a church up in Northumberland and just went in my clothes. And I sat down. And I do something like this every once in a while. Haven't done it recently, but I sat down. Probably my clothes smelled a little bit because of the barn. And I sat there. But I remember as a little kid, we had a truck driver. He finished the milk route, driving the truck, and he parked the truck out in front because he got it emptied and he didn't get home in time. But he'd come to church in those work clothes. I thought that was the greatest thing under the sun. I mean, here we are, all dressed up, spiffy and everything. He comes in with his blue jeans and work shirt. And it was right. He sat with the rest of us, just like he belonged there. I had a woman in one of my churches up in town, didn't bathe properly. Husband didn't either. And she would come to church and nobody would sit with her. And she'd sit towards the front and stuff. And I went in their house oftentimes. And one time they were sick and I had a person come to me and say, I want to fix something for Betty and her husband, but I can't go in that house. I just can't. And they had cats in there and they pooped all over the place and everything like that. I said, you fix it, I'll take it in. And I did. I took it in. Now, they tried. You know, people tried, but they found it hard to do. So it doesn't surprise me that somebody would say, you sit here, I'm going to sit over here where the air's fresh and stuff. Well, he's writing to them and he's saying, you can't do this. God is not partial. He loves every people equally. And this is the problem that he's dealing with. It's the whole problem that's going to be a whole part of his message. There are going to be different parts of it he's going to speak, and I'm going to mention a couple of those other parts with it. But favoritism is the problem. Now, Jesus talked about it as well. Because he said there was two people that went down to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a publican, a tax collector. He worked for the Romans. And, you know, if you work for the Romans, you stink. That was how the Jewish people felt. If you work for the Romans, you stink. And so they went to pray. And Jesus said, the Pharisee stood up and he said, oh God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I give you all 10% of everything I have. I tithe my breadcrumbs. And all, you know, he goes on to talk about how he does everything and stuff. And then the publican puts his head down and says, God be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus said, the publican went down to his house justified. The Pharisee didn't. You know, there's that favoritism that we look down upon somebody else. And we expect God is going to treat us a little bit better because, well, we are better, you know. And that's not the thing. Now, in my junior church lesson last week, I talked about that, about how we can look down on other people. And it's in a children's way. But children can do it too, just as adults can. So we need to be very cautious. Now, having said all that, I want to go on to talk about the practical aspect of that. And James talks about it in a very practical way. He says this, in chapter 1, which is just before he talks about favoritism, he talks about this. He says, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues, deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Do we have any sense of compassion for these people and their pain, their loneliness and their hurt and their fears in their distress, and keep oneself from being polluted by the world? Keep oneself, in other words, stay clean. But don't be afraid to hang around with those who are suffering and who may not measure up to the highest standards of the community. They need our love too. And just before that, Paul says this, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do not do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. You know? I don't look in the mirror very often because it's very discouraging. I look there and I say, who in the world would ever want to be married to something that looks like that, you know? And fortunately, my wife has poor eyesight, so that saves our marriage a lot. But we forget. If you've ever been to one of those sideshows where they have that wobbly mirror that shows you distorted, but I'm talking about a mirror that makes you look good. Now, we don't have a lot of those. You remember in Cinderella, the wicked witch says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Well, until Cinderella came along, she was. But when Cinderella came along, she wasn't. And she didn't like it. Didn't matter how bad she looked, she was still the fairest of them all. When I was in college, I went to a place and had a portrait, not painted, but portrait picture done, and I came back a couple weeks later to see it, and they had it in black and white. And they said, "We can do this in color, and it'll be better." And they took the name of the color of my suit and all that kind of stuff. Now they may have already had that technology there, but it made it sound like they were going to do the job. Well, a couple weeks later, they came back with that portrait in color. I never looked so good in all my life. I mean, they had my complexion so perfect. If I'd had a pimple up here, it was gone. They had removed it and said, so, it was a nice picture, but it wasn't me. I mean, it was me, but it was all touched up me. And when Oliver Cromwell was Prime Minister in England, back at the time, following King James, his son Prince Charles became King Charles, and the Puritans had revolted against it. They took the head off of King Charles, and it wasn't a nice time. It was a rather rough time in England at that time. But Oliver Cromwell became Prime Minister, and the Puritans ruled in England. And they did a portrait. Now, they made a lot of mistakes, the Puritans did, and they didn't last very long as the rulers, because King Charles's son came on the throne. He fled to France, and there was a kind of another revolt in England a little bit later, and they put down the Puritans and they brought back the king to England. But in any event, Cromwell, they did a portrait. I'm not sure whether Cromwell ordered it done or whether his backers ordered it done, but they did a portrait of Cromwell. And when he saw it, he said, "Take it away and paint it as it is with warts and all." Cromwell had some warts on his face. They didn't put the warts there. He said, "Paint it with warts." Well, that's how we need to see ourselves. We have some warts. All of us have some warts. And that's an important thing. Now, our time is going up. I want to pick up the word "call" is in here. It won't be in any of your translations because it's been translated out. But in chapter 2, verse 7, it says, talking about the rich, and he says, "Are not they the ones that are making life terrible for you? Are they not the ones that are hauling you into court? Are they not the ones that dishonor God with their blasphemies?" And he says, "Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him to whom you belong?" Now that's how it's translated in the NIV. But that's not what the Greek says. The Greek says, "Are they not blaspheming the name of him whom you have been called on?" That word "called" on. Epikaleo. Now, epi means on, it means after, it means at. Think of the word epilogue. It's a word that comes at the end of a book. It's the word. Logos is the word, logic we get from it. Epi means after. So epilogue is the last word. It's a word that comes after. There's been a earthquake in Turkey, and they talk about the epicenter, where the center is, at the center of where it is. The epi means right at the center of the thing. But it can mean after too. It can mean on. You've been called on Jesus, or you have been called on in his name. You've been called, like we've been called upon to do something. You've been called upon by Christ. And you are him. They are blaspheming the one who has called you by his name. You are called a Christian. That's in there. Now, I want to go on to final thought here, because it does mean whom we belong. We are Christ. We belong to Him. But here's the thing. Here's the word that he talks about being humble. He says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all make many mistakes. Wow. We all make many mistakes. You aren't perfect. Don't hold it over others because they don't seem to measure up to your standard. You need to be loving, healing, forgiving. You need to treat all on level ground. The cross is on a level ground where we stand before God. So no one's better. No one is worse. We share the problem together. Now, one final thought, and I want to bring that. I got an infection in my finger. I was working down at my pond and fixing a dock down there, and I got a sliver. I got a sliver in my finger, and I didn't think much about it. Got it out and sent it out. But a few days later, I noticed red streaks going up my arm. Now, I've had that happen before. That's blood poisoning. And you got to deal with that pretty soon. But I only had a sliver down in my finger. I didn't see any red streaks going up my hand, but they were there going up my arm. Now, I should have had the infection just in my finger, right? That's where it was. But the infection had gotten into my blood. And what Paul is saying about this, now I went down to the doctor. Yeah, and the doctor sent me straight to the hospital. And when I got to the emergency room at the hospital, they took me in, and they drew a line around where those red lines were. And then they put me on an IV. Right in that arm, they put me on an IV to get to not the disinfectant, but what's the other word I'm looking for? That you get treated for, George. Help me with that word.
The source of the problem.
Well, it's the source of the problem, but they give you a medicine. That's the fight.
Antibiotic.
Antibiotic. Yeah, antibiotic. Yes, they put the antibiotic right in there. And they said, if you see those red lines going beyond these marks, you get back down here. You know, it was in my finger. It wasn't in my arm. But it was infecting the whole body. And that's what Paul says when we have favoritism. It isn't just a small incident. It poisoned the whole system. And if we failed in one part of the law, we failed the whole law. We've been called by Christ's name to be in the image of Christ. And Paul says, I'm in travail until Christ be formed in you. And James could say the same thing. Now, we need to pray and then look forward next week to what's going to be done there. Father, thank you for your grace. Thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for being understanding. And thank you for being sometimes strict and tough, because we need it. And thank you for those who are as forgiving of us as we need to be forgiven. Help us to be forgiving as well. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. See you next week.